Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be talking with author and creator and educator, Josiah Golojuh. Josiah, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I throwing in the educator there. That is part of what I do, right? And it's
Absolutely.
and it's funny because I always when I teach, I always like tell people like I do that. I mean, obviously because it pays the bills and provides health insurance and all that stuff, but because fundamentally I love writing and telling stories. And even though I mostly teach composition and all that stuff, the practical stuff, it still comes down to like that love of words and writing. And I try to get my students, if you can tap into that aspect of it, you don't have to love it like I do, just like understand why I do, and you'll get a little bit more closely connected to it. So I like that
Love
you
that.
added that in there because I sometimes sort of forget it or downplay it in my own life, even though it is a significant part of my life. So.
Yeah. I want to ask you more about that because that's a passion point for me. I'll also mention the name of the book here, The Paper Boy, and we'll come back around to talking about that a little bit. But that is a big emphasis for me because I love writing. I do it when I can. Sometimes I get paid for it, sometimes I don't. But what initially created that passion for you?
So my passion for writing. So when I was initially loved writing, I was in the fifth grade. There was a very specific incident, and I had a English class in the fifth grade, and
Hmm.
everyone else had written about their family vacations. They had, most kids had, I'm from near Pittsburgh. I grew up in north of Pittsburgh in the woods, and the setting of the Paperboy. And they all wrote about, wherever they went on vacation, Disney World, a lot of kids, and being on the East Coast. I'm near Disneyland now, the poster's behind me. And a lot of kids went to Disney World, or they would go to, maybe SeaWorld in Ohio. So yeah, SeaWorld in Ohio for those of us in the area. I don't know if it's still a thing, but it was a thing then. They went to places like that. They would go to, maybe Canada or something like that. They go on all these cool vacations, or at least I thought they were cool. And I didn't have, I come from I'm a family of four, and we weren't like low income or anything, but we didn't really go on great vacations. We would like go to like a friend's camp nearby or something
Hmm.
like that. So it wasn't like, and I always enjoyed it. I don't want to complain, but I didn't, when I'm hearing these other vacations, I wasn't jealous, but my kid brain was like, I could come up with something better than that. And
Yeah.
so I did. And now I didn't come up with a vacation that was like a lie. I didn't want to like deceive people. I came up with something that was clearly made up and very imaginative. Like you had a butler and you had a helicopter you operated by your hands and all these things. And it was a place that had a very whimsical name. It was I happen to share the birthday. My birthday is March 2nd, which is the same as Dr. Seuss. So
Uh-huh.
that some of the names had, I can't remember the names of the places, but they had very Dr. Seuss like names. And so that was the sort of the first time, but partially not just that I made all these things up and I was being a silly kid, that was what I submitted for my vacation assignment in the fifth grade, but also because um, the other students voted on their favorite, like you then presented your vacation, right?
Hmm.
And the other students voted on what their favorite was. And there was a tie for first place. I was one of the two, and the other one was like this student who I still stay in touch via social media, Carl, and Carl was like going to like Cabo or something, some fancy vacation like that, where mine was going to Fantasyland in my brain,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so we were the two that won. So it's kind of shows you like there's the practical kids. Yeah, I just want to go to this beach in Mexico, and and then there's other kids who are like, yeah, I want to go in the adventures with Josiah and in on Neptune in his brain. And
Yeah.
so, but that was that moment of like validating my creativity. And that was the very first moment. And it's very distinct. And like I said, I wasn't making up something to deceive people, but I didn't realize it, to entertain.
Yeah.
But I think the reason it worked because it was first for me, something that I would want to experience. And that's how it started. And I remember it very distinctly. And that was the first time I got positive feedback for being creative. So.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I've given writing assignments like that many times, and very cool that you took it in that direction. And you just never know the moment that inspires somebody. So, as an educator, glad to hear that story.
Yeah, I've had other incidents, not many, but there are times where like that taught me the lesson of like taking risks
Hmm.
in things, and there's times where it's backfired. And I've had in college, I my undergrad degree is in history, and there were times where I in one semester I wrote two research papers. One was they were both written as narratives, and one
Hmm.
was the professor hated the paper. It was the worst thing she'd ever read. She couldn't believe that I would submit this paper. And in another class was also written as a narrative. She thought it was the most beautiful, elegant, like amazing research paper she'd ever read. So
Yeah.
that can happen too.
Yeah,
So
true enough, true enough. Well, the story of the paper boy, how did this story come to be? What were some of the ingredients, the inspirations, and backstory of this?
so it's kind of fitting that, I live now in Southern California, and um despite that fact, it is rooted in it is rooted in I have copy here next to me. I'm glad it happened to be on the chair. It wasn't planned
Yeah,
that way.
that's very
Um
attractive.
Yes, it's rooted in despite my location, it's rooted where I am from. Talking about that moment of being a kid, like it is about it goes into dark, heavy themes and explores it because as a kid, I was interested in that stuff.
Hmm.
I tackled the darkness and I was always interested. So it engages in it and it confronts evil in hopefully a way that can engage a young audience, but it was rooted in the place that I grew up. And
Hmm.
I saw the great beauty and also the great conflict that there was darkness in certain places. I saw people that were intriguing and I saw people that were scary, right? And it's set in a local trailer park, which you can see, there's a trailer here.
Hmm.
And so basically the story is Daniel is a newspaper delivery boy. One day he gets chased into the woods by some bullies, and there he discovers the body of a young boy. And
Hmm.
that unfolds the story as that boy then becomes a ghost who haunts him, known as the Corpse Boy. And they kind of unravel the mystery of what happened to him and how did he die. So that was rooted in that place that I grew up, but it's also rooted in what connected me to others as a kid and sort of what inspired me. And it's kind of funny. This side of my garage, we're here, this is kind of more the Disney side, just by
Hmm.
default. And the other side over there is more the comic book side, which I'm not in front of because the car is also in here. This is my garage. And that side is where you see all the comic book stuff. That's also a big influence in the book. So there's all these references to comic books and pop culture and all these things because that was and really is my world, and
Yeah.
that's how especially as a kid, that was how I made friends, with trading cards and stuff. And
Hmm.
that's how you
Hmm.
connected like a kid. Oh, especially then, it was before, like kids today won't get this, but it was before everybody knew who like Ant-Man was. And like
Yeah.
every obscure character didn't get a TV series on Disney Plus. That wasn't a thing. Like you would like read Wizard, the guide the comics and things like that, and hope that they would then have an opportunity to like you would like read the fake casting call that they would do where it was like
Hmm.
hypothetical fan casting thing when they maybe they'll make a movie about this someday, and if they did, wouldn't it be cool if this person played Iron Man and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They would do those things, and you knew who those characters were and nobody else did,
Yeah.
and that's the characters in it connect. And another thing I created is this is within the story, there's a lot of fiction. This is Young Zombie, which is one of the examples of the metafiction. So
Love it.
there's
Love
there's
it.
a lot of references in the book. And one of the things that I was excited about, there was a point where my editor didn't know that one of the references was something I created for the story or if it was real, because
Uh,
I was trying to weave it in with real things. And most of the references, because there's references that are very specific to the plot. And obviously, those are things where I'm not going to be like, oh, that's not going to refer to, something owned by Disney. That I created things that are specific to the story, because then it also reflects thematically things in a deeper way than just referring to like, Spider-Man or what have you. So I created things like Young Zombie. I created a character, the Grim and the Ghoul, that are very critical. Like this is going to be from a future comic book called The Burrow, and these are
I
characters
love
that are
it.
referenced. I don't have an image of, well, I mean, he's on the cover of the book, but he'll be in that comic book as well.
Hmm.
So those are things that then kind of like add nuance to the story, but also connect the characters. And that's how this unlikely friendship can form because that is part of what my world was at that time. This is all going back to that question of like where it came from, because it came from my love of all these things. And part of what inspired it was me looking back at some of the characters that I created. So some of those characters that I used to populate that fictional, that metafiction world, the universe within the world within the world kind of thing, was stuff that I created as a kid. So I found all these old drawings and notes, and that one I don't have near me, of all these characters I created, and that's stuff that I brought into the the story, and I wove some of those in. Some of them, like, there's a specific trading card of a character called Mercenary. And I found my original drawing of the character Mercenary. And I just was always obsessed with that as a weird name. It's like, and these characters are, like a very, he was meant to be a very 90s style character intentionally, that like,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
guys like Cable and like a lot of the Image Comics type characters. He's one of those kind of guys intentionally. And so, all but the things that I remember, it was actually the same friend, Carl. Thinking about it, I would go. He lived down over the hill from me. I had to go through the woods and down to his house, and we would read Image comics together. He had like
Hmm.
Spawn comics and these other comics, and that's how we would connect. And I would connect with, he would maybe not has been into comics, but he was into those because those were edgier, those were cool. So it
Yeah.
was it was kind of how we would connect over different things, and that's a big part of the book too. But it comes from another big thing is just the people. So it's rooted in the people that were there. So a lot of the people that populate the trailer park were based on real customers I had. So
Mm,
some of the
cool.
people like are very real. So one of the advanced readers I had was a girl I grew up with. I didn't know her super well, but we went through elementary school, high school together, and she's reading it and she's asking me questions. Like she's messaging me. She's like, "Did this person live at this trailer?" Because there's a lot of the geography I mess with for the story purposes, but it's based on a real place. And I'm like, "Yeah, actually, he did." Did he wear? Did he sit? I'm like, "Yeah, he sat and he did this." And it was her grandfather
Mm, hmm.
that I wove into the story, but it kind of the point where I kind of lost the reality in the fiction, and like, but that was like this character was her actual grandfather that I kind of wasn't sure where the real person was in the fictional sort of creation was. So it was like, but I was pulling from there's people that were just totally made up, but then there's real people that populated that trailer park because they were just so bizarre and interesting in good ways. So that's where all this came from. So
That's awesome. That is so awesome. And I love taking like elements of your fandom. And I mean, amazing that you also created these metafictions. And it sounds like those are continuing as well.
yeah,
You
yeah.
have more
And
on the
and so
way.
like for example, Young Zombie, um, we were able to and I'll show you as well. My daughter did one of the covers. So my daughter
Love
Penny
it.
did this one with this is an updated version with some characters from the little edition for my daughter Prim.
Hmm.
This is so my friend Sam Tung, who he did this art here. He did like storyboards for X-Men 97. He did storyboards for Twister. He worked with me years ago before he was more successful in smaller projects. And so he did the Avatar characters. If you like look at my YouTube channel and you see like cartoon Josiah, he did that
Hmm.
art for me. So he did these for and that was when Prim was a baby and Penny was smaller. But Penny did this cover, and we funded the creation of the comic book via Kickstarter, and then hopefully we'll do this via Kickstarter as well for the Burrow, so that I
Cool.
can tell those stories, because for the Paperboy, I have a publisher, so that's not just me on my own. Whereas with the comics, it's kind of me, making that happen with collaborators to help me. But that is
Hmm.
me
Hmm.
more me in the trenches by myself. So with the help of some artists like Penny here, and
Yes, absolutely.
this one though, I will say this one is pretty cool because this is cover by Bill Mouse, who Bill did Zen Intergalactic Ninja, who that
Hmm.
is our connection through Steve Stern, who's
Hmm.
been on this
Hmm.
channel before. And so this is kind of for me the coolest version of this because I envision this as if you look at the comic I'm holding, imagine this as the comic book that in like 1995 that Daniel and the Corpse Boy, this is the one that they would bond over. Like this actual comic, as you see it, would be the thing that they would have, right? They would have
Love
this
that.
cover drawn by Bill Mouse in the 90s. Like this is the version of Young Zombie that they would be enjoying. So. And Young
That is so
Zombie is more
cool.
of like a fun, funny, like referential, like superhero. Not superhero. It's like less superheroes. It's zombies, and it's still referential to like collecting and stuff. If you look in the front, he's using a B-wing fighter from Star Wars as a weapon to fight a zombie. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool. That is awesome and great world building. And I'm curious about, I always ask about process. So I'm curious about the process of like working on the prose novel versus the collaborative process with the comics and bringing those things together. What's the process like on both of those?
So the process for in this particular novel, it's been a long pathway. So like it started out as a screenplay, and I went to grad school at USC,
Hmm.
and it started out as a screenplay in Coleman Huff's screenwriting class. And Coleman was a instructor of mine who worked for with Steven Soderbergh on like Full Frontal. So if you've
Hmm.
seen that film, and it's a film that doesn't get enough credit, maybe because of the name and the sort of like edginess of it. And it's kind of fitting to learn later that the name was changed by Harvey Weinstein, and he wanted like a sexy name, which in retrospect, oh, I see that, because the
Hmm.
original
Hmm.
name was How to Survive a Hotel Room Fire. And there was supposed to be, and it's, I think I have the script over there, my bookshelf's on the wayside part of that. The original script that was published, Coleman wanted it to be based on, she found this like thing from like the 1930s where it was instructions on how to survive a hotel room fire that was real. And she loved to
Hmm.
use stuff like this in class. And it was like a list of what to do. And the idea was that all these characters that are intersecting. And I think this is a bit of an inspiration of the Paperboy too, that it's like the flow of the Paperboy when I first started writing it was just like, especially in the screenplay form, it was just like walking
Yeah.
through the trailer court, and it was a literal flow, which is if you watch Full Frontal, that's the way that movie is. They're just like walking and flowing and talking.
Hmm.
And with that, with her screenplay, the idea was it was broken up by these chapters of like what those instructions were, and that was going to be like a framing device for the movie. And it was still like meant to be heavily improvisational and all those things. That's because she comes from a theater background, and so she loves that stuff. And Soderbergh, he actually does like that stuff. And at the time, especially, his thing was very much like he would do like one big studio movie and then one movie that was like more for him, like on a lower budget. And that was
Hmm.
like the him movie at the time. And he probably did like an Ocean's 11 movie after that. I don't even know. But um point being was, so she would bring like activities like that. And she unfortunately passed away at then like February, I believe, of it's 2023 or 2024 right now, right? Beginning of
Hmm.
this year. So right, and kind of fittingly right before I did find my publisher. So I think that
Wow.
she passed, and maybe there's some serendipity, maybe she's an angel, however you want to view it. There's so I'm a person of faith, and
Hmm.
Coleman, she wasn't, but she was very metaphysical. So she's probably acting somehow on my behalf. But she would love to try to bring different approaches to your story. And so what she did was like one day she's like, I don't even know if I was working on this yet, but she said, I want you to draw a map of your childhood street. And she specifically said that. Now, I grew up in the woods in Pennsylvania, so drawing my childhood street would do nothing for anything for a story. And
Hmm.
so I was like, that does nothing. So I drew my paper route because that would be something I could map out. And I don't think I was working on this story, even though I had this in my mind for a long time, because, like I said, I knew that there was a lot of interesting characters. And so I mapped out my paper out because I used to, if I was going to go on vacation or something as a kid, I would have to draw a map of what trailers to deliver to for the kid that was going to take over.
Yeah.
And so then I would
Yeah.
give him that map, and he would know which trailers to do and which trailers to skip. And if there was any like, this one gets a rubber band and this one gets a plastic bag, whatever notes it was for that trailer. And like I said, it actually delivered, like, was in the trailer park. And I lived across, like I said, I lived across the way up in the woods. It's that's part is actually as described in the book, actually. And and which is funny because it unintentionally creates kind of an interesting dynamic from like this outsider into this world for the story that was not intentional, when I'm writing it. I'm just like, that was just how it was. And so that was sort of the roots of this becoming a story that made sense from that
Mm-hmm.
very thing with Coleman. So that's kind of how it started. And then writing it then first as a screenplay, I think that helped me. And I think actually it was very similar to like laying on a comic book script because like working with the script for Young Zombie, for example, it was very much structuring and laying it out. And
Mm-hmm.
depending on who you're working with a comic book, they might be comfortable with, like, for example, with I haven't worked with Bill Mouse on an extended like comic script, but we've talked about future projects, and he's like, whatever you want to give me, he's like, if you want to give me a detailed script, I'm cool with that. If you give me less, I'm cool with that because he's just experienced and comfortable. Some
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
want a lot, some people want a little. So it's kind of understanding who your collaborator is in a comic book setting. Like some people that might be experienced vets might want to take control if they're the artist. If you're the writer and you're inexperienced, they might need to take the lead, or vice versa, just depending on where you're at, right? With Bill, he's like, even though he's, much more experienced than I am in that space, he's like, whatever you want to give me. He's like, if you want to give me a very detailed script, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. We can, talk it through however you want to, do it. But with Young Zombie, I was very super specific as to what each panel would be, almost like a shot list for that. But with the Paperboy, it was also helpful because writing it as a screenplay first, like it helped me understand the flow of the plot really,
Mm-hmm.
really well. And that's something that really almost, once I had that locked down in the screenplay form, that kind of almost never changed. Like a lot of things got added and moved around and things like that. Like once it got beyond just being a screenplay and then into a prose book, it, expanded a lot. But I
Mm-hmm.
realized, oh, I needed to know the story structure. And writing it as a screenplay was almost like writing a really, really detailed outline. Like and it changed in some ways, but it's like, okay, the basic plot never did. Like it
Cool.
fundamentally did. Like that was really helpful. And I realized like, oh, that was me doing a really, 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 really detailed outline. And it's funny because that's something I tell my students constantly when they're writing composition, because I can read a paper and I can tell it's like, I know you didn't do any kind of outline. It's like
Right.
you have to do something. Like I don't know, it doesn't have to be super, super elaborate, but you have to do something. You can't just
Mm-hmm.
do none at all. Like I can tell you did none at all when I'm reading this. So, and especially like with like, I try to like in the classes I teach usually are 8 weeks right now because that's what students want. They want to get this over with quickly. I'm like, but you got to do it. You got to do that as outlines. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that was really, really critically helpful for me, especially for this story and doing the outline that way. Because there are times where I'll just sit and write scenes and I'll write, even if I'm writing a screenplay, I'll write it out as prose and or
Mm-hmm.
vice versa. Just, you play with different formats and just see how it feels. And, because there's, I wrote this as a screenplay because I was at the time in a screenwriting class and it was the the project that I had. I remember another project that I wanted to work on in another class that was not meant to be a screenwriting class that I wanted to write as a book, and my teacher was. This is the first time. This is the only time this ever happened to me, and I want to revisit this. And this is 15 years later now that I still have. I have a screenplay that I wrote out of this that I've not touched since then. And the teacher's like, "Oh, you have to write this as a screenplay because you're a screenwriter." Like, but can I want to write this as a book? She said, "No, you're a screenwriter." I'm like, "But I want to write it as a book." And I'm like, what kind of teacher are you? And I argued
Right.
with her, and she's like, well, and basically she was almost like threatening to not grade me if I didn't, and which is insanity. So,
Yeah.
in retrospect, but I'm like, I wrote what she wanted. And now it's funny, I look back and I can't read like any of the notes she wrote all over the paper.
Mhm.
So, but point being is though that that was I find that like the process is kind of jumping around on each project, but at least in this I realized like in retrospect what I was actually doing was just like very thoroughly outlining in a strange way to
Mhm.
find my way there. Because once I got, like I said, so I wrote it as the screenplay, and then once I got there, it was like, oh, this is now an outline for the novel. And then okay, I have that outline, and now I wrote it as a prose novel, and then going back, and then the editing and revision, moving things around, that was like a whole nother ball game of process. So in terms
Hmm.
of the comic books, it's very much writing it as laying for me it was like laying it out like almost shotless with dialogue, so kind of similar to that screenplay, but like because in that case I was working with more inexperienced illustrator on Young Zombie specifically. So
Yeah, yeah. You talking about that teacher just makes me think like I love writers that have range. So just the idea that somebody would be like, "No, you're this, you are this. You don't go over here." That's just so
and that was my
interesting.
goal. I'm like, I'm trying to, yeah, I was trying to like if I didn't have range, at least try to establish some or see if I
Yeah,
had it.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the final question is, what's next for you? This book, The Paper Boy, is out in the world, and Zombie Boy is out there as well. So curious about what is next, and also where people can connect and find out more about your work.
So, what is next is I am working on a Zen Intergalactic Ninja prose. It'd be like novella length, so it'll
Love
be
it.
like a shorter. So, Steve, um, I don't have again all these things that I should have within reach. So he gave me a copy of one he wrote
Hmm.
within the last few years, and it's kind of he calls them Zen illustrated fiction. So I'm excited to write one of those. So it's basically kind of like the classics illustrated, what's it called, classics illustrated, what are the
Hmm.
the those I had several of those. That's how I read, like, Last of the Mohegans and stuff like that as a kid. And every few pages there would be like an illustrated black and white picture, and so it'll be one of those. So I'm working on that. So hopefully that'll be done very soon. I've got it all. That's one where it's a great example of like the haphazardness of the process can be sometimes, because I started to like write down notes, and then like I kind of went in a completely different direction. So I'm like, oh no, this is, and then so I have like all these like different, like, oh, if I can do two of them, that'd be great now. Because like this one I like in a different way. So and so that is like ready to, not ready to go, but ready to like be written actively. So I have my rough outline, can sort of start. I have some notes and things. I have some scenes written out actually. So start to like put that together. That's the next immediate thing. The next big project, I have a couple in mind. That in terms of the next novel, one would be sort of my tentatively titled Murderland. It's like a take on Disneyland. Is what if not I would say what if Disneyland is evil, because depending on your perspective you might see it as such. I personally love Disneyland, but I also
Yeah,
can understand why you might not. So that's on the horizon as well. That's in the very early stages. I've had notes and notes for years on that one, but I think that that could be really fun, and it would be a good follow up to Paperboy, because it's kind of like it would be very much like there's no direct sequel to Paperboy because the way it's written and structured, but this would be very much like a spiritual sequel to Paperboy if I did one. So that would
hmm,
be the next thing. And then the next sort of project that I'm would be like is on Kickstarter right now. It's not live, but you can find, if you look up Josiah Golojuh, you can find the Burrow.
hmm,
And the
hmm.
Burrow, like the campaign, like not like the active campaign, but like you can follow the Burrow right now to then, and then once I launch, that'll be, and so hopefully I'll launch probably not the end of this year, but sometime at the beginning of next year. And
Cool.
that'll be the next like comic book in the sort of the world of the Paperboy metafiction stuff. So that'll be coming out, or not coming out, but like Kickstarter for that comic book would be early next year. So the goal was the end of this year, but here we are in November, so that's not happening. But the priorities and getting all the ducks in a row in terms of like the little things, like okay, making sure I have because that one, most of the comic is complete, but I need to get a few pages colored. So like when
Hmm.
I had an artist do part of it, and then they, this is when you're doing these things on a low budget. That artist backed out, didn't get it completely colored, and then didn't get all the art finished on a couple more pages. And then I want to add like I want to add like a fun B story, hopefully. So that's the trouble with those. The indie comic scene is, people. And then I found another artist that she had agreed to do that stuff. And then before I even established a launch date, she's like, "Oh, I can't do the project anymore. I don't have time." And I was like, "Well, we didn't even establish it. schedule or a time. But so that's okay. But I have some other people hopefully lined up that will do it. But that will be as long as all those things get sorted out, that should be early next year. And that will again be the sort of the next in that universe of the Paperboy. And you can find the Paperboy right now on Amazon.
Hmm.
Hopefully, will be Barnes and Noble soon. I'm talking to my publisher with about that. You can get Young Zombie as well. So the print Young Zombies you can only get in print from me, so you can only get those in print from me, but you can get the digital version on Amazon, which the digital version on Amazon is cool because it is 20 pages of the Young Zombie comic book, but it also has it's 80 pages total. So there's 25 additional pages of so Young Zombie was printed as a 6 page comic. I used to have a film festival in LA and we did different cities
Oh,
around the country. And we did one in Pittsburgh and Seattle, and mostly we were out of LA in an art gallery called the Hive in downtown LA. And Young Zombie was part of an anthology comic that we only were able to sustain for 2 issues, unfortunately. So it was part of issue one for a 6 page thing. And so you can find that original 6 pager plus the other, the 25 pages or however many from Astounding Tales of Adventure, plus like a bunch of history, plus designs for the young zombie characters, all kinds of stuff in there. So it's 80 pages and that's digital only, but it's available on Kindle and stuff like that. So you can get that on Amazon for like $3.99. And I
mhm.
think it's a really good value, and it's really cool because it gives you a lot of the history of creation of that. A lot of like design elements. You can see Penny's cover, and like there's like a cover art gallery, all that stuff. So all kinds of extra stuff. You can see the alternate covers. You can see the history of the project, the struggles to get some of these things created, all kinds of fun stuff like that. The struggles, the fun stuff,
Right.
the good and the bad, the ups and the downs. And then so that's available right now. You can, if you're in Southern California, you can see me. I will be. Gosh, what's the date? December, like the first Saturday in December, the second Saturday in December at Comic Book Hideout. I don't have the date, but I'll be there at an event. I will be on December. I know we're chasing the clock here. I will be in Pittsburgh. This is the first announcement of this. I will be in Pittsburgh on Saturday, the 28th at Phantom of the Attic in Oakland for a signing there because I'm going to be visiting my family. So I'll be assigning at Phantom of the Attic in Pittsburgh on the 28th of December. So that'll be another one. So you can see me there. And I think those are the ones I have on the calendar right now. So if you want to get the print versions of some of the stuff, that's where you have to see me in person. But you can get things online. And yeah, so that's what's there right now. You can find me, Josiah, as Josiah is Right, WRITE, as in writer. So you can
Mhm.
find me on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram. And both on YouTube and Instagram, follow me there because I am about to do a giveaway. So I'm going to do a giveaway for the novel where you can get the novel, you can get the comic books and stuff. So I'm going to do a giveaway because I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I'm 1,000 on Instagram. So I'm going to do some kind of giveaway to help me get over that hump. So and I've been on the edge for a while now. So hopefully I can get over that bump barrier there. But so if you're seeing that, subscribe and like or whatever it is, follow. I guess it's follow in Instagram and subscribe on YouTube, whatever the
Mhm.
terminology in the right place. But yeah, wherever you are, I am probably there as Josiah is Right. So you can find me there as Josiah is Right.
Awesome, awesome. Well, very exciting things, and I love that you are out creating, and I love that it sounds like there's much more on the way. I'm glad to have you back anytime to talk about the process, to talk about creating, and we should plan a comic-centered episode when the Kickstarter does launch. Maybe you and a couple of people from the creative team or something like that.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, yeah, yeah.